been? We had you on 4 years ago for Nixonland,
Yeah.
and since then you have written more words than I can keep up with. Every time I look, there's
That's
a
to
new,
pay the rent, my brother.
Yeah, I guess so. So you do it for the money. It's a business thing. So all right, let's this thing, just help me out. This thing's in the bag, right? It's done. It's a done deal. Over.
You did tell him I'm a historian, right? Yeah, I don't love the prognostication thing.
No.
But we do have this guy Nate Silver,
Yeah.
right? Jewish guy.
Who and let's just pretend you're Nate because you look similar.
Right. We do.
So you've got a blog, 538.
He lived in Chicago. Did you have him on?
I had him on in New York too.
Right.
And you know what? Here's a funny story. This is a true story. This is a terrible story too. He was on the show in New York, and it was great. It was wonderful. And he actually, at that point, it was about a year ago, and he predicted that Romney at that point was going to win. But all of a sudden, there's been this backlash against Nate Silver for being the Democrat. Yeah, right. And there was this hit piece on some site, some very, very far out, not a moderate site, but a very far out right-wing site, and they called him like the new castrati or something, very effeminate.
They
called
said
out
he was a mincing homosexual or something like that.
and they linked to the interview that I did. So it got me a lot of hits, and I was happy with it.
See, that's why I write about the right.
Yeah. So it worked out for me and also for him because there's
Well, the whole phenomenon you're referring to, which is that not only people on the right who want to kind of conjure up this kind of fictional world. Remember when Karl Rove said that we create reality and you just write about it, right?
Sure.
But also not just people on the right, but these kind of centrist pundits, these people on TV who make their living literally, well, not literally, well, in the Joe Biden sense of literally, pulling things out of their ass, right? And Joe Scarborough literally said, how can this guy Nate Silver say that Obama has, what was it, like a 73% of winning,
70, yeah, okay.
when my gut tells me that the race is tied?
Yeah, it's like those old scouts in baseball who say that guy's terrible, and then you look at the stats.
Look how ugly his girlfriend is. How can he possibly be a good pitcher?
That's right.
And he's, what he's doing is Moneyball, right?
Yeah.
We see movies, right?
Yeah.
And he's taking away their livelihood.
I don't see movies, but I know that one. So just help me out, though. Is it fair, because you wrote the piece in the Baffler that came out, I think, yesterday, and it did begin with Mitt Romney as a liar, and it went very deep into the fact that it's not just that Romney's a liar, but that he's a liar because of a conservative movement that has been kind of based on lies that exploit people in ways other than politically.
Right.
So explain that first, and then I'll ask you if you're correct about that.
Well, the piece starts out with a phenomenon I noticed in 2007. I just had started blogging for a Washington liberal group called Campaign for America's Future. And this might have something to do with why the conservative movement turned against me. The name of the blog was called The Big Con.
All right, yeah, that will do it.
And so I signed up for all these right-wing magazines, Human Events, which was Ronald Reagan's magazine, townhall.com, which is the magazine of the Heritage Foundation, so kind of very much part of the conservative establishment in Washington. Newsmax, which was kind of this far-out site that had a lot to do with Bill Clinton being impeached. And the fascinating thing is, when you subscribe to a magazine online or you get in a mailing list and it's, say, The Nation or the American Prospect, you get these kind of, because you're on their mailing list, you get these advertisements. Help a starving orphan, flood relief, the Red Cross, right? But I began to notice, please enjoy this message, Newsmax reader. And the message would be, here's the 23-cent heart disease cure the medical establishment won't tell you about.
Yeah.
Or
so completely bullshit.
Snake oil salesmen.
Scams.
Yeah, scams,
Okay.
really. And the fascinating thing about these come-ons is that they kind of shaded almost imperceptibly into the political come-ons. So in other words, Ann Coulter would sign a advertising letter for this crazy scam investment newsletter. Right, and the guy who she was advertising is a guy named Mark Skousen, Skousen, whose uncle Cleon Skousen was Glenn Beck's guru.
How do you spell his uncle's last name?
And I knew Cleon Skousen because he was one of these big John Birch Society guys in the '60s who had claimed to have gotten a hold of the Moscow's 45 point secret plan to take over America.
Okay.
And one of the points in the plan was to replace beautiful sculpture in America's public parks with ugly, deformed abstract sculpture.
Is that the way we got the Picasso?
Right, exactly. So that's part of the. So there's this kind of direct lineage of crazy, but these same people are involved in all these kind of money scams. And Al Coulter was talking about how all the people who are running your Wall Street portfolios are all just a bunch of drunken liberal frat boys.
Wall Street.
Right, on Wall Street.
Okay.
Right.
Well, here's my question though. I mean, and
So, I mean,
you make
the
the connection, but they need to sell ads. They need to make money. They're in print journalism. You understand that.
Right. Well, there's lots of kinds of ads.
Right. Well, I mean, the left wing don't they have like hookers in their ads? I mean,
That's kind of true, actually, now
Yeah.
that I think of it, right? In the back of the Village Voice, but they don't
Yeah.
really, have the Village Voice classified ads anymore. But the point of it is the rhetoric is the same, right? And it's an infantilizing rhetoric. And one of the things that it also resembles is something that's very big, both in kind of the grassroots, kind of evangelical culture out in the suburbs, and also Mormon culture, which is this thing called multi-level marketing.
okay.
Right, which is also
Like a
known by the
pyramid
phrase
scheme?
pyramid
Okay,
schemes.
yeah.
Right, so since if you saw at the Republican convention that the message of the entire convention was the only people who have any moral worth in society are entrepreneurs, and if you're not an entrepreneur, you're basically a moocher. We
Yeah.
built it.
Yeah.
Right,
Which
And-
was of course based on a lie.
Right,
of
which
what
was based
Obama
on a lie
did
too.
not
So
say.
it's
Yeah.
all the great circle of life here.
So how does this connect
So
with
multi-level
Romney?
marketing things, basically are sort of selling people the chance to be entrepreneurs when they're really just these kind of pyramid schemes that leave the last person kind of holding the bag. So this is kind of saturated on the right.
Sure.
And how does it relate to
Take me
Mitt
up
Romney,
to Romney.
right?
These ads, and then Romney, who I get tells
Well, these
lies,
guys,
but he's a politician.
among kind of the conservative elite, kind of the brazenness with which you're willing to kind of hustle the person the person who's kind of one rung down on the food chain is how you kind of prove your mettle. So Mitt Romney had a job on his hands, right? He had to convince the Karl Roves of the world. He had to convince the Grover Norquists of the world that he was one of them. Well, one way to do it was to kind of profess their kind of policy prescriptions, which of course, he did. I mean, the day before yesterday, he was saying we should get rid of FEMA, right, and the Federal Emergency Management Association.
Yeah.
But another way you kind of convince these people that you're one of them is that you possess this kind of ability, these kind of stones to brazen out that kind of mendacity, right? So, for example, when Richard Nixon really wanted someone to break the law on his behalf to save civilization for the Republican Party, which were, of course, coterminous, he would say, bring me a healthy right-wing exuberant. Right? These people who are willing to kind of do anything because they believe they're
Somebody
fighting
who, from what I understand about Nixon, he necessarily didn't even agree with.
didn't necessarily agree with them when it came to ideology. But when it came to finding someone who was willing to do anything to get the job done, he knew that it was the right-wingers he had to go to. So that's one level of it. The other level of it is, Mitt Romney is telling lies in another sense in that he's, telling fables. He's saying that the government plays, no role in, kind of creating prosperity, right? Tell that to someone, in the South who didn't have electricity until the Tennessee Valley Authority came along, say. So, he's telling these kind of Reaganite kind of fables, and they're lies too, right? And his ability to kind of present this kind of very simplified, almost kind of bucolic vision of a world that's kind of divided into good and evil, right? In which there's kind of no vagueness. That's also the way someone like Mitt Romney kind of brings in the kind of grassroots of the conservative movement. But either way, you can't just say, well, let's look at this guy Mitt Romney as a person.
No.
Let's look
you
at him
can't
as
do
someone
that.
who was chosen, right? So what does it say that both the elite by this point and the grassroots of the Republican Party have embraced so full-throatedly after some compunctions someone who so patently is going to be a liar until the polls close on Tuesday? He's still going to be saying, that General Motors, because of the government bailout, has moved all their Jeep production to China, even though General Motors has, basically done the kind of functional equivalent of looking Romney in the eye and saying, "Shut up, stop lying."
So Rick, that's clearly the Jeep situation and many other situations. Yeah, I can see that clearly a lie. However, how do I know that I'm not existing in some kind of bubble, a liberal or at least a Democratic Party bubble here in Chicago, here at the Hideout, and that I am missing similar style lies from the left? Now, I think I'm not. I'm pretty sure I'm not. But how do I know that?
Well, is General Motors the left?
No, certainly not. But let's take the jobs report. Maybe you're going to say this is just spin. So today there's the jobs report, and the Democrats come out and say, as you knew they would, that hey, this shows we're creating jobs. And then the Republicans say, no, it's not at all. It's showing that actually the unemployment rate is higher by 1/10 of a point than when Obama took office.
Well,
so
there's
one
an
of those
explanation
is
for
true
that.
and one of them's not true.
They're actually both true, and that kind of speaks to the kind of complexity which is part of being a human being and part of which the kind of conservative movement can handle. So the reason the unemployment rate is higher is because the economy is a little bit better, and people who had taken themselves out of the employment market out of frustration and stopped looking for a job have, lo and behold, when the Bureau of Labor Statistics surveyor calls them, says, "Oh, I just started looking for a job." Lo and behold, they go from inactive to being part of the unemployment rate.
but
right?
still without a job.
Still without a job. But it's a statistical artifact. Coming up with a statistical portrait of the world, it's not something you just kind of pluck off a tree like a ripe fruit. It's a difficult, complicated process.
So,
right?
so you mentioned at the beginning that you're not a prognosticator, you're an historian. On Wednesday, as a historian, what will you write?
Actually, by then I'll be retired. I actually have been thinking about what I want to do next. Have you ever seen that reality show, Bering Sea Gold Prospectors? Right? About the guys who scuba dive underneath
I was
going to
ask you several questions about that show, as a matter of fact.
No, I mean, I'm pretty tired of politics.
Really?
I'm pretty burned out about it. I mean, there's a lot of bullshit. I'm one of those people that actually is pretty disappointed with Barack Obama.
You are, and you had a piece in Chicago Magazine,
Right.
which was the cover piece, everybody should check it out, in which you say, because a lot of people on the right have said, Obama, he's a Chicago politician.
Right.
And you're saying there's two strands of Chicago politician, neither of which he does that well.
Right.
What
And
are-
one of the strands of Chicago politician is kind of using the power of government demagogically to basically buy votes.
Sure.
And sometimes that can be done in wicked ways, and sometimes it can be done in good ways. I mean, building O'Hare, that wasn't a terrible thing, right? Building the Dan Ryan Expressway, that was something that Mayor Daley did, the old machine did, right? Let me compare a Chicago-style way of doing a tax cut to a Barack Obama-style way of doing a tax cut. The Chicago-style way was what George Bush did. He's like, I'm going to give everyone a tax cut, and this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to send everyone a check right before Election Day.
And people were happy. $700, a gift from
right.
Uncle George.
And the headlines in the paper says, checks in the mail, right?
With
Bush
Bush's
checks
name, yeah.
with Bush's name, right? Obama, being a kind of wonky, very non-Chicago style politician, decided that he was going to dole out his tax cut, which went to 95% of American families, in tiny little invisible increments that appeared every 2 weeks in your FICA statement. And lo and behold, when they said, do you think taxes went up under Barack Obama or they went down under Barack Obama, by 2-1, people didn't even realize that they'd gotten a tax
And
cut.
he did it because
it
studies
was
showed
sensible,
that
yes.
if it was these small increments that people would spend it.
And Franklin Roosevelt actually did things very differently. He was a high-minded guy, but he was willing to kind of do things in a way that actually got himself political credit for the things he did. For instance, when he created the Social Security program, instead of just taking the money from the general revenue, he actually created this thing called a payroll tax that shows up on your paycheck every week, so people would feel like this Social Security system belonged to them. and that if anyone tried to take it from them, their money that they paid for, they were going to scream bloody murder. And someone said, why did you do it this way? This probably wasn't the most efficient policy. And he said the whole thing was political through and through. And lo and behold, when they passed that bill, the guy who was the head of the Postmaster General, who was also the head of the Democratic National Committee, a very political guy named John Farley, good Irish Boston politician, ordered the post office to put up posters in every office saying, a monthly check to you for the rest of your life. Right?
They used advertising.
They
knew
used
that
advertising.
That was effective to get the word out. Whereas Obama, and if there's a criticism of Obama, to me, it's not that he hasn't invited people over for a beer, because that the culture of Washington is such that that's not happening, but that he has the biggest bully pulpit in the world.
He hasn't used it
and
effectively.
he hasn't moved the conversation the way.
Right. And then quickly, the other style of Chicago politician comes from my own beloved native Hyde Park. I used to live right down the street from that house on 51st Street. It's represented by people like the late Alderman Leon Dupre. It's represented by people like Harold Washington, who came from Hyde Park, in which basically you built and stored your trust and capital with the public with these kind of high-minded, kind of moralistic acts of principle. And look, I'm not the president. The Oval
you are
Office
not.
is not a Boy Scout troop. It's a rough job, but I think it would be hard to argue that Barack Obama honored the kind of politics of principle that a lot of us kind of saw coming 2007.
So
Now
let me
it's
ask you
hard. I
this.
mean,
If Romney were elected,
yeah.
and who knows, we don't know, how will, and this is a cynical question, but how will our lives change? If Obama hasn't lived up to what you say he should have, I have to believe, if you are a supporter of him in some sense, that you think that things will happen negatively.
It'll be disastrous. I mean, I'm casting my vote for Barack Hussein Obama. But I mean, the way that, for example, the Ryan budget was written, and don't make any mistake about it, just like George Bush, the day after the 2004 election, declared a mandate to end Social Security, and Scott Walker, after being elected in Wisconsin, declared a mandate to end public sector unions, even though they hadn't run on those things. The day after he's inaugurated, they're going to use principles written into the Ryan budget to try and get through these very radical, drastic slashing of government programs that all of us need, using the budget reconciliation process, which only requires 51 votes and won't need to pass a filibuster. So America will change radically for the worse if Romney becomes president.
I don't want to get